Hello and welcome to the first installment of Lost in Translation. Today we are talking about Power Rangers and Super Sentai. Japan has a series of shows about different teams of spandexed heroes referred to as Super Sentai. The first of these shows was Himitsu Sentai Go Ranger, which first aired in 1975. Haim Saban took footage from the 16th installment of this franchise called Kyoryu Sentai Zyuranger and spliced it with American-made footage of English-speaking actors. This Frankenstein monster of a show called Mighty Morphin Power Rangers premiered in 1993. The show was a huge hit, and while its popularity has dwindled since its heyday, the series is still loved by a loyal band of kids and adults. If you grew up on Power Rangers and have never seen an episode of Zyuranger, you really should check it out. It's a lot of fun, and it's very interesting to see how elements of Zyuranger were changed to fit in with the characters and settings of Power Rangers. While the two shows share footage, the execution of this footage is very different. Let's go ahead and take a look at the first episodes of each series, their strengths and weaknesses, and what their overall purpose was. Part 1. Intro Music. Let's go ahead and listen to the Power Rangers intro.
10,000 years I'm free! It's time to conquer Earth!
Alpha, readers escape. Recruit a team of teenagers with attitudes.
Awesome! Yeah! The song itself is simple and stupid, but it did its job of being catchy, memorable, and getting audiences pumped for the show. The composer Ron Wasserman has done a number of catchy theme tunes, including this one. Yep, same guy. The only thing about the intro is that I'm not sure we really need Rita and Zordon to rehash the premise for us. At least, it's not necessary for the first episode. It makes sense for subsequent episodes, but we don't really need an origin story recap in the origin story. But Saban was cheap and probably didn't want to make a unique intro for just the first episode. Okay, let's look at the Zyuranger intro.
Kyoryu Sentai Zyuranger!
I'd personally give a point to Power Rangers for its intro theme. It's iconic and memorable in a way that the Zyuranger theme would never be. Even still, it's interesting to note the feel and tone that Zyuranger is trying to create versus Power Rangers. The Power Ranger theme has a lot of electric guitar. It's emphasizing the action parts. There's going to be cool fight scenes, and you should be excited to watch them! Zyuranger, on the other hand, is more interested with instilling a sense of whimsy and fun into the minds of the viewer. The music is softer and orchestral, which is connected more with epic journeys like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. It may not seem like much, but these intros already demonstrate the difference in philosophy of these two shows. Power Rangers is a series of self-contained stories that end up creating a mythos and overarching story, but more on accident than on purpose. Zyuranger is all about the journey from episode 1 to 50. It's a big, epic adventure, and its intro reflects that. Part 2. Characterization. Power Rangers decides to open Day of the Dumpster immediately on the villain Rita. With no explanation, a couple of astronauts open a space dumpster and release her. She then immediately talks about destroying the Earth because apparently she just feels like it. This gets the basic premise and explanation of villains out of the way so that the story can shift into focusing on the heroes and flesh out their basic characteristics. Zyuranger spends more time setting up the villains. There is an actual explanation for the space shuttle. The planet Nemesis is close to the Earth, and someone decided it was a good idea to send people to a planet named Nemesis. And children are there too for some reason. What the hell? Why would you bring children on a space mission? Kids are just a liability. They can't help maintain any of the equipment, are probably unqualified to handle any of the equipment, and are more than likely to break something. I also have a hard time believing either of those kids pass the necessary physical training to travel in space. Of course, they come along so that they can be put in peril and be saved by the heroes in a dramatic fashion later. Power Rangers finishes establishing the villains in about 2 minutes. Zyuranger takes a little over 4 minutes to establish the villains and basic premise. The Zyuranger villains are instantly more engaging and interesting than their Power Ranger counterparts. They have bits and pieces of personality. Bookbach is a clumsy idiot with vacant space in his head where his brain should be, Topot is uptight and anal retentive, Griffersur is angry and fierce, and Putty is incredibly disinterested in anything around him. They aren't strong personalities, but it's still more than what's given in their intros in Power Rangers. Also, damn. Pandora just brutally killed these two guys like a minute after she was revived. Pandora is hardcore. After the Pandora gang is released, we immediately see their threat and destructive power. Pandora is much scarier than Rita. That's not to say that Zyuranger is superior to Power Rangers, I just think at least in the first episode that it did a better job of constructing the villains and setting up the conflict. Power Rangers, however, did a much better job of establishing the protagonists. Instead of putting emphasis on the immediate threat, Power Rangers decides to take us to a juice bar where our heroes are just generally chillaxing and doing everything except their homework. These small scenes give us a brief look at their hobbies and basic personalities. Jason and Zach are good friends and capable fighters who like to spar with each other. Jason is wearing a headband and more appropriate clothes for fighting, so it's safe to assume that he's the superior fighter. Trini is doing kata by herself, and so she is probably also a capable fighter, but is more reserved than the other characters. Kimberly is doing gymnastics. She's very acrobatic, and we get a sneak peek at her energetic personality. We also learn that Trini and Kimberly are good friends that support each other. Then Billy enters the scene. We don't learn much about him here, but we can figure out from his demeanor and the way he carries himself that he's not a martial artist like Jason. Bulk and Skull show up, and from the way they're dressed and carrying themselves, the audience can figure out they're the bullies. While Bulk and Skull inadvertently teach children that sexual assault is not okay, the audience get to see both Trini and Kimberly kick ass, and they do it without anyone acting like it's weird that these girls are good at fighting. While Zach does try to come to their aid because he's a good friend, he respects the girls' wishes to handle the situation themselves. It just feels normal that these characters should be capable of this kind of action, and that was pretty progressive in 1993. I mean, it shouldn't have been, but it was. After a brief scene on the moon where the audience is reminded that there is a villain who is up to no good, we cut back to the juice bar where we learn a little more about Billy. We see his lack of confidence, and while we haven't seen his hyper-intelligence yet, we know that Billy is not as athletic or into martial arts like his friends. We also get another scene with Bulk and Skull. I wasn't entirely convinced we needed two scenes with Bulk and Skull this close together, but upon a second viewing, both scenes serve very different purposes. In the first scene, we are shown that Kimberly and Trini are good at fighting. We are also shown bad social behavior that we shouldn't imitate. Lessons on social interaction continue in Bulk and Skull's second scene, where they barge in on Jason's karate class because they want to learn how to beat people up. This show got a lot of criticism when it was first released on fears that it would encourage kids to be violent. But I find this scene to be very interesting because before Bulk and Skull appear, we have Billy explain what the purpose of martial arts is. Bulk and Skull get humiliated again, but they get humiliated because they just want to be violent with no real purpose or discipline. The show is telling its viewers that blind violence is wrong, and it does so in a way that isn't a preachy PSA. Of course, preachy PSAs were attached to the show later. You want to know the really amazing thing? Everything I've just described happens in under 7 minutes of the episode's runtime. Yeah, on the whole, this episode isn't very good, but the script writers were very good at economic storytelling. They knew they would only have a short amount of time to get children to connect to and like these characters, and they used their short number of pages and minutes effectively. And it worked. I loved these characters as a kid, and most fans of the series have at least one character they loved. These characters were instantly relatable and fun. Unfortunately, Zyuranger isn't as successful in establishing its protagonists. Whereas Power Rangers was concerned with using its opening time to establish the main characters, Zyuranger was more concerned with creating the threat, and to its credit, it did that very well. As a child, I was never all that scared by Rita. She never really did anything except send down monsters and make them grow. She was a capable villain, but even kid me never saw her as much of a threat. Pandora is completely different. She is a beast, and not a force to be trifled with. Power Rangers started us off nice and easy. Zyuranger doesn't want you to be relaxed. It wants you to know that the world is in peril. As Barza goes around the room awakening the warriors, his urgency is real and palpable. Not only is Pandora wreaking havoc, but she's also taken children hostage. Children! The trade-off from the sense of peril and urgency is that we aren't introduced to our protagonists till about 10 minutes into the episode. This episode is only about 20 minutes, and so there isn't any time to get to know the characters since they have to immediately try to save the day. They get a brief introduction, but we don't learn anything about them other than the weapons they use and that May is a princess who likes to wear makeup. Unfortunately, Barza breaks the key to their leader Geki's door, meaning that he doesn't show up until about 14 minutes into the episode. And while his entrance is dramatic and cements him as the group's badass, it does mean we know nothing about him other than that he's the leader. The Zyurangers get much more development as the show goes on, but in the context of this episode, they're pretty generic superheroes. So you might be thinking that Day of the Dumpster is superior to The Birth because of its focus on characterization. But there's always a trade-off. And that trade-off is that while the Zyurangers themselves aren't as compelling as the Rangers, their fight scenes are much more interesting and engaging. Part 3. Fight Scene Analysis and Conclusion. In Day of the Dumpster, the Rangers get attacked by Rita and her putties and are forced to transform and access their superpowers. They are then transported to another area to make the Japanese fight footage usable and then fight and fail to kill Goldar and the Megazord. The fight is satisfying enough given the context of the episode, but there's not really a strong sense of escalation. Once the Rangers start winning, they just keep winning. There's never any point in the episode where they're in real peril. Even when they lose to Rita's putties, there isn't a strong sense that they're in danger, just mildly inconvenienced. As a kid, you don't really care too much because in your head you're thinking, "Oh my god, they have suits now, and weapons! Their suits are cool! Holy shit, there are robots in this show too! Mind blown!" In the end, the fights in this episode do their job of establishing what to expect in the show. Monsters show up, the Rangers transform to fight them, they eventually get in their robots and win. Cool. Before going deeper into analyzing the Zyuranger fight scenes, I'll go ahead and get a surface observation out of the way. Zyuranger had a much better production budget than Power Rangers did, and so pretty much all the effects and choreography was better. So everything in Zyuranger just looks better than Power Rangers. Is this fair? No. And Power Rangers certainly did the best it could with what it had. But it's a simple fact that Zyuranger just looks better. Now with that out of the way, let's make some more interesting observations about the way fight scenes are handled. In Day of the Dumpster, the Rangers are in control for most of the situation. The Zyurangers, on the other hand, are never in control of anything. At the very beginning, there's trouble when Geki's key breaks. The Zyurangers have to go into battle without their leader, and boy do they get their asses kicked. Pandora's henchmen get the better of them, and then Pandora herself shows up and messes up their shit. The part where Pandora shows up is particularly interesting. It's pretty obvious that Pandora could probably kill the Zyurangers if she felt like it. Just like she could kill these children rather than constructing a complicated death trap set to a timer. Pandora loves to torture. She's a sadist. This is part of the reason why Pandora feels like such a more capable villain than Rita. She's still silly and comical, but her silliness is an extension of her natural instability, so even when she's being weird and wacky, instead of being funny, it's a little unnerving. Anyway, the Zyurangers end up in a cage with the children in danger about to die. This is when the Zyurangers get their first break. The spirit of the Tyrannosaurus intervenes and opens Geki's door. Geki then magically shows up at the Zyurangers' location somehow. Holy shit, Geki is here! Geki frees his comrades. Barza then gives them their medals, allowing them to transform. Why didn't he give the medals to them when they were all in the same place? The world will never know. The Zyurangers transform and finally take control of the situation. In my opinion, the Zyuranger transformation is much more satisfying than Power Rangers. We've spent the entire episode watching Pandora just wreak havoc everywhere, and so when the good guys finally start winning, it just feels awesome. But don't get too comfortable. Just as the Zyurangers save the children from untimely death, a giant comes in and, you guessed it, wrecks their shit. The Megazord does not come in and kill the monster. In the end, no victory is won. You might be thinking that this bummer ending makes The Birth inferior to Day of the Dumpster, but that's not true. The two episodes just have very different purposes, and the endings of each showcase those purposes. The ending of Day of the Dumpster was to try and sell this show to an audience that had no idea what Super Sentai was and was completely unfamiliar with the trappings of the genre. A depressing ending would not have done that. Zyuranger, on the other hand, was the 16th installment of the Super Sentai series in Japan, and it was far from the first one to have combining mecha. Audiences, for the most part, would have had a pretty good idea what to expect from the show. That meant that the writers could be a little more experimental with the storyline. In Day of the Dumpster, we have the Megazord front and center. The main purpose of this series was to sell toys, and the Megazord would have been the most expensive flagship toy. From a business perspective, it makes sense to have it appear in the first episode so that kids would be more likely to ask their parents for it as soon as possible. This wasn't as huge of an issue for Zyuranger since parents would have already been aware that there would be big robot toys their kids would be asking for as gifts. Day of the Dumpster's story is presented in a way that is as immediately gratifying as possible. It needed to start with a bang if kids were going to buy toys based off it. Unfortunately, this hurts the show later on. While the Megazord's first appearance is epic, because it appears in the first episode, it becomes normal and mundane very quickly. In Zyuranger, however, the Megazord, yes, I know its name is Taijujin, but I don't feel like saying that a million times, so I'm just going to say Megazord, deal with it, doesn't show up at all. In fact, none of the mechas show up in the birth. The T-Rex appears in the next episode to fight the giant, but the Megazord itself doesn't show up until episode 6. Fans of Super Sentai didn't really need the giant robot to show up immediately. This trope wasn't new to them. That meant that the way the mecha were introduced was as important as the mecha itself. The robots needed to be distinct and original from the robots of the past shows. Not having the Megazord or any of the other mechas show up in the first episode meant that their appearance was more special. It also meant that the Megazord itself was more significant and amazing. And just like watching the Zyurangers finally start winning in the first fight was sirloin steak deliciously satisfying, the same is true of the first time they used their Megazord to win a giant monster fight. They are finally in control of the situation and Bandora is forced to go on the defensive. The balance of power between the Zyurangers and Bandora is constantly shifting, and while at times it can make the Zyurangers seem a little incompetent, it ultimately makes their success after their struggles more satisfying and the overall narrative more compelling. Overall, both debut episodes do their jobs. Day of the Dumpster does a good job of selling the premise and basic structure of Power Rangers to an audience that would have been completely unfamiliar with Sentai, and The Birth does a great job of establishing the threat of Bandora and the fantastical adventure the Zyurangers would embark on in order to defeat her. If this video has sparked your interest in either Power Rangers or Zyuranger, both shows are available on DVD and online. You can stream every episode of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers on Netflix, and every episode of Zyuranger can be streamed with English subtitles at shoutfactorytv.com. Thank you for watching, and may the power protect you.